Sort of the most telling thing, and related to the first thing that we saw, is the incident locations. And here what we have are various incidents coded by type all over the Philippines. And what you see right away is that there's a pretty good spread all over the place. And at first we thought that maybe contradicted what we saw before, which is that geography was going to play a major role. But what we found is when you start digging down into it a little bit, and you look at specific groups here, if you want to look, you can see that this is just the Abu Sayyaf group now presenting. You can see that there are small locations that tend to have pockets of attacks, especially in the groups that we are examining. So going one by one in terms of the three major groups that we're looking at, and then not examining other, because that would be everybody else. What we can see is that Abu Sayyaf tends to be focused in the south there, in a region that becomes very important, that Dr. Miller will talk about. We can look at one of the more well-known groups, which is Jama'ah Islamiyah, also taking place relatively in that same area. If we look at the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, again, the same area, again this is crowding into this area. If we look at the New People's Army, however, we can see that the rest of the country is much more affected. Again, we had unbalanced data here, 70% of the incidents coming from the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. So what we suspected, and it ended up being, as I said, half true, is that geography would play an important role. That said, what it ended up being was the absence of specific geography ended up being more important. If it wasn't in the autonomous region of Muslim Mindanao, which Dr. Miller will address in a bit, it pretty much is going to be NPA. And so, and we'll talk a little bit about the implications for that. When you look at some of the other things here, we can size by, for instance, deaths to see if those were going to be a major issue or whether we thought they were. It turns out that it doesn't seem to be a lot of changes, particularly in regards to the NPA. So we suspected that might not be as big a role here. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Miller, who will discuss some of our findings.
Did anything happen? Anything different? All right. Well, that's good. Thanks, Josh. Okay. Well, I'm the numbers guy. I have no idea what any of those groups are. Abu Sayyaf, and thank God I've got Josh to fill in all those and answer all those questions that you might have about just exactly what's the influence of JI on Abu Sayyaf or MILF. I'm going to try to talk to you a little bit about the statistics. That's my background, is in statistics, and particularly in applied statistics. I am absolutely not a theoretician. I couldn't prove anything in the limit if I had to or die. One thing that Josh, I hope he gave you a kind of an idea of this massive, massive data set. It's a relational database, which means that most statisticians, I think, would recoil in horror just thinking about trying to deal with a relational database. We have a young man named John Hitzman, and I just tell him I need these variables for this period of time and this geography, and he gets me a flat file, which then I can feed into, random forest. So I don't have to fuss with that either. I told Chris Hale when we were first getting started on this thing 5 years ago, and he was building this relational database. If you ever get a chance to read his dissertation or take a look at it, I really think it was an act of genius to be able to fit all of this data together, linking it all together through the keys that he created. But I remember telling him, that if he were to spend a good deal of his dissertation simply on the problems that he had taking the data out of the data set and then using it, he was using CHAID, C-H-A-I-D, that a lot of people would consider the dissertation worthwhile just for that. Just, he tried this and it didn't fail. He tried this. I mean, it did fail, and he tried this other thing, and it was successful. And I thought that would be a topic for a dissertation right then and there, a very practical one, and a lot of people would get a lot of good out of it. But he insisted on going with CHAID. That AID thing, I hope I'm not confessing too much, but I can absolutely remember back in the day, as they say, doing AID analyses by hand. My little comptometer in my little desk at where I worked back in the 60s, with my manual, my Morgan and Sonnquist Moore manual sitting by my side trying to figure it out. And then I can remember absolutely blowing away my clients. Coca-Cola, very sophisticated marketing research company, really big, high-powered guys, were just totally mesmerized by this technique, this AID technique. Meanwhile, another friend of mine was working with Sloan Kettering, I think. Where have I heard that name before in this conference? Anyway, Sloan Kettering was trying to come up with predictive models and using essentially naive Bayes. My friend was a Bayesian, and which I thought was really outrageous. I liked him anyway, but at the time it was really outrageous to be a Bayesian. But he was working on a predictive, same kind of a predictive problem as the Coca-Cola people were, trying to identify people who loved Coke and hated Pepsi. I did read an article. I'm sorry, I just read it last night, so maybe I shouldn't talk too much about it. But I love the title. It was Idiot Bayes, rather than Naive Bayes, which I thought he thought it was terrible because the technique was, what did they used to call it anyway? On surface naive, but maybe really a lot more to it than people gave it credit. So he preferred, I guess, Idiot's Guide to Bayes, kind of a description of the thing. I think he actually preferred Independent Bayes as being more descriptive. It's not really Bayesian. I'm not a Bayesian, but I believe that most Bayesians would say that the technique doesn't. Although we use Bayes' theorem, we feel like the probability of a group being the culprit, the culpability for this particular incident, which is characterized by the xj vector taking on k different dimensional values, and you know the rest of the Bayes' theorem, and basically, if you just think of this as a constant down the bottom, that basically this thing, the posterior probability of the particular group Abu Sayyaf, given the fact that it was an armed assault, you have that posterior probability, and you can compute at least what it's proportional to, and then multiply it all together, because you've got capital K, maybe lots of different levels for armed assaults, arsons, bombings, and then for XJ you've got the the incident type, and then we've got location, and we have time of day. We have all kinds of address variables, how you get to where this thing took place, where in time. Going in, I can tell you that our basic understanding of our data set, just knowing how it's built, how it's constructed, we feel like we've got some really good location data. Okay, we actually have laps and longs. Okay, and at least down to the city level or town, village level, and within, say, like Baghdad, we have types, sort of areas of town. We figured date, or at least the day it occurred. We have really good data on that. We figured we had, we don't have good data on who did it, as Josh said. Even in Iraq, which is the most studied, when we were doing our study with Dan Mabry a few years back, it was a little over 50% of the attacks in Iraq were actually identified as being Al-Qaeda or Sunni or not. And And as we said, here in the Philippines, you may not think that 70-odd% of the attacks being actually identified more or less officially is a good probability. Now it's a lot less. It's coming down since then.